Hello, good evening. Welcome to Storytime. Today I'm going to review The Power Broker, an epic Titanic book at the forefront of urban power. It's by Robert Caro, a New Yorker himself. The Machiavellian Robert Moses, who, from what I have gathered, ran New York with an iron fist for over 40 years, virtually in secret, which is a remarkable feat when you think about it. He had more power than any mayor or governor combined, and he ran roughshod over them and was not shy in showing them that he was in control. Never elected to anything. He was a genius at accumulating influence and control and ultimately power, and that's the key part of the story. It raises questions: where did he come from? What kind of a legacy did he leave? And how did he use his power exactly? As I look at my notes here, I see idealism. So Robert Moses was an idealist when he was young. He was a dreamer. However, he was frustrated in his attempts to get things done. In New York, he was obsessed with civil service, government. He was idealistic. However, when he got crushed by the juggernaut Tammany Hall, eventually he became more cynical, and that really was who he was ultimately. Power became his drug, and Moses was a real user. He relied upon matriarchs and patriarchs throughout his career. Ultimately, when he was at his apex, he utterly dominated New York and didn't need anyone. He wrote laws that were so difficult to perceive and understand that he ran rings around others in his vicinity. His legacy was roads, bridges, highways, and many, many other things. So I'm going to have a look here and read a little from The Power Broker by Robert Caro. So, looking at the life of Robert Moses. So it talks about his idealism. It talks about what he was like in Yale. People who saw him just saw this curiosity. And now I read. Okay. This is basically the context in which he had his dreams crushed. Then he became more cynical. He became the Robert Moses that many now love and hate. Probably hatred is the stronger emotion, as he was very controversial. So this is in the aftermath of his ego crushing defeat. So great a nuisance did he make of himself that in 1918 Tammany Hall decided it had to crush him. It did so with efficiency. At the age of 30, with his system being used as scrap paper, Robert Moses was standing on a line in the Cleveland, Ohio City Hall applying for a minor municipal job, a job which incidentally he didn't get. When the curtain rose on the next act of Moses' life, idealism was gone from the stage. In its place was an understanding that ideas, dreams, were useless without power to transform them into reality. Moses spent the rest of his life amassing power, bringing to task imagination, iron will, and determination. And he was successful. The oath that was administered to Robert Wagner, who I believe was the mayor of New York, in City Hall on January 1st, 1954, should have given Wagner supreme power in New York. That was the theory. In democratic America, supposedly ultimate power rests in the voters, and the man for whom a majority of them cast their votes is the repository of that power. But Wagner knew better. The spectators may not have thought that he had a choice in dealing with Moses. He knew, rather, the spectators may have thought that he had a choice in dealing with Moses. He knew that he did not. Why then, when Moses pushed deals across his desk, did the mayor say not a word? Possibly because there was nothing to say. Power had spoken. So, I continue. With his power, for 20 years prior to the day he strode out of City Hall in triumph, Robert Moses shaped a city and its sprawling outskirts, and to an extent that would have been an incredible feat. I'm paraphrasing slightly here to avoid too much jargon. The city in which the shaping by his hand is most evident is New York, titan of cities, colossal synthesis of urban despair. It had become a cliche by the mid 20th century, to say that New York was ungovernable. And this meant, since the powers of government in the city had largely devolved on its mayor, that no mayor could govern it, could hope to do more than stay afloat in the maelstrom that had engulfed the vast metropolis, as we see today in Congress, Senates, especially in the United States. You know, roadblocks, stonewalling, lack of creativity, it stifles so much. However, Moses was such a genius, he was able to break gridlock and do things his own way. In such a context, the cliche was valid. No mayor shaped New York, no mayor, not even LaGuardia, left upon its rolling surface more than the faintest of lasting imprints. But Robert Moses shaped New York. Physically, any map of the city proves it. The very shoreline of the metropolis was different before Robert Moses came to power. He rammed bulkheads of steel deep into the muck beneath rivers and harbors, and crammed into the space beneath bulkheads and shore immensities of earth and stone. So that's an example of the influence that he had. Let me read a comment here by former President Barack Obama. I think about Robert Caro and reading The Power Broker back when I was 22 years old and just being mesmerized, and I'm sure it helped to shape how I think about politics. So it's a cultural phenomenon, this book, in many ways. In the elite classes, it's almost like a Machiavellian, the prince for the modern age in New York City and urban power. So I have a few more comments and then I will leave it at that. Okay. Activists, excuse me, activists who talk about going up against the system. You see it a lot today. Going against the system. He was the system. He made himself the system. While it wasn't pretty, there is a genius there, and that's, I think, what is fascinating with the story. He left a legacy that is just titanic. His personality quirks, his self-entitlement, unfortunately his racism, they were on display in the way he designed New York City, and it's fascinating to learn about that. He compared himself to the Caesars, but the old joke is it's not the Caesars that he would have liked been compared to. It's more the ones, perhaps Nero, the psychopathic ones, perhaps, that he gets compared to. He was obsessed with gratitude and the gratitude of the public, and in his old age, he was a very sad old man. He was left devastated by, in many ways, losing his power at the end, and the limitations of the situation he found himself in. Eventually, um, It was a Rockefeller that really was the fault of his demise. So it just goes to show even the most powerful can be taken down, which is a pretty striking reality. I will read a little more. Okay. One measure of the career of Robert Moses is longevity. His power was measured in decades. On April 18, 1924, 10 years after he entered government, it was formally handed to him. For 44 years thereafter, until the day in 1968 when he realized that he had either misunderstood Nelson Rockefeller or had been cheated by him, and in either case he had lost the last of it. He held power, a power so substantial that in the fields in which he chose to exercise it, it was not challenged seriously by any governor of the state of New York State, or seriously by any governor of New York State, or during a 34-year period from 1934 to 1968, in which it extended over city as well as state, by any mayor of New York City. He held power during the administrations of 6 governors: Alfred E. Smith, the first Irish American Catholic to run for president and an incredibly rich character, almost like a leprechaun come to life, so to speak, who was just incredibly charming, and he really had a way of working his way up New York City. Moses idolized him. Franklin D. Roosevelt, an epic name in history himself. Herbert H. Lehman, Thomas E. Dewey, and W. Averell Harriman, as well as Rockefeller. Also, he dealt with some of the most famous mayors, including Fiorello LaGuardia. And this was summed up Moses. As I said, he was addicted to power in the end. In 1974, at the age of 85, when this book, I believe, was published, he was fighting with desperate cunning to get it back. So he never stopped. I'll read one more piece and then I will call it a day. There's an interesting piece here on his development at Yale. So he basically did the same thing at Yale that he did in New York City. He made himself someone who was on the outside, the ultimate insider. As I search for certain paragraphs, my newness on this channel is on full display. So this is the last piece I will read. I appreciate the attention to the video. I appreciate it very much. Okay. Power is the backdrop against which both confrontation scenes should be played. I'm kind of jumping in here into the middle of a paragraph. For power was the reason for the contrast. The whole life of Robert Moses, in fact, has been a drama, okay, of the interplay of power and personality. For a time, standing between it and him was an interceding force, the passionate idealism he had displayed in Yale. Dedicating his life to public service, he remained during the first years of that service the idealist of those brainstorming sessions, an idealist possessed, moreover, of a vision of such breadth that he soon dreaming dreams of public works on a scale that would dwarf any yet built in the cities of America. He wandered tirelessly around New York, full of ideas, just full of ideas. So I think when you look at people in history, powerful figures, it's often by power of personality. I think Moses, in a way, it was the power of the intellect and his conviction. Let me finish with this. Okay. For all of these reasons, this book attempts to tell two stories at once. How New York 40 years ago was a very different city from the city it is today, became what it has become, and how the idealistic Robert Moses became what he has become. It must try to be a book about what happened to the city and what happened to the man. Trust me, a lot of people suffered in how he got his things done. It's pretty shocking how he was so ruthless. That's also part of the story. For to an extent few people have really understood, these stories are one story. Would New York have been a better place to live if Robert Moses had never built anything? Would it have been a better city if the man who shaped it had never lived? Any critic who says so ignores the fact that both before and after Robert Moses, mayors and others, the city was utterly unable to meet the needs of its people in areas requiring physical construction. Robert Moses may have bent the democratic of processes of the city to his own ends to build public works. Left to themselves, these processes proved unequal to the building required. The problem of constructing large-scale public works, it's a fascinating thing, public works, the great parks, etc., in a crowded urban setting where such works impinge on the lives of or displace thousands of voters is one which democracy has not yet solved. Moses himself, who feels his works will make him immortal, believes he will be justified by history. It is possible to say only, without Robert Moses, it would have been a different city. So I thank you for your attention. I'll leave it there. Um, Well, it's a fascinating story. Robert Moses. The book is an epic tale. Well, The Power Broker by Robert Caro, and it's a classic. It's almost the people who've read it. I feel it's almost like a secret society because it's become kind of a cultural phenomenon. But people in power, politicians, business people, um, those who are insiders, it tends to be an inspiring tale for many. And he was a complicated figure. While he was admirable and detestable in many ways, I'm not sure. I'm disappointed in a lot of the things he did. The lack of public transportation, which I feel is a huge. I have never visited New York myself. Um, I come from Ireland, and I think that the lack of public transportation is a shame. New York has some, it could have had more. However, there's a part of me that is in awe of his ability to impose his will on the reality of New York City. And he was a master of power, no question there. Anyway, I thank you for listening. My pleasure. I appreciate it sincerely. Please like, share, and subscribe. I hope you enjoy this. Um, I hope that I conveyed some good information. So, thank you very much. Have a good evening. Take care. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay.